Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 3 of our 6-part Aether Revolt full set review. Today we're going to look at all of the black cards as well as some of the multicolor cards that are in the set. If you've watched these videos before, you kind of know what to expect. We're going to look at each card, we're going to talk about how they are limited, and then as long as they're powerful enough to cross over potentially into some other formats like Standard or Commander, we'll briefly touch on that as well. Having said that, quickly before we get started, if you check out the description below, you'll see some links to our Amazon affiliate store, where if you make any purchases, whether it's Aether Revolt products or anything else really, a small percentage will come back to help support the channel. That's always appreciated. Also, you'll find some links to our Patreon page, and that's another way to support us keep doing what we're doing. So, having said that, we got a lot of cards, so let's get into the review. And we're going to start off with Aether Poisoner. Now, this is part of the cycle that we've been looking at. We saw the white one a couple days ago. We saw the blue one yesterday. This is actually a little bit better than those, I think, because it gives Death Touch. So much like the others in the cycle, enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy, and when it attacks, you have the option to pay 2 energy to get a 1/1 servo token. That's nice, but I like the Death Touch tacked onto this because a lot of times the limited Death Touch is very powerful. It can come up the game. It can trade up, which is important, and there's maybe a better one in the cycle. I really like the red one, but this is definitely one of the best. Strangler, another good limited kind of beater. I like this. Costs 3 for 2/3 menace. More than happy to play it. Due to the fact that it has menace, I feel like you can probably still get across a lot of times with this on turn 4, maybe even turn 5. And it does its role. It gets some damage in. And it's resistant to shock with 3 toughness, which is good too. Battle at the Bridge. This is fantastic and limited, first off. There are some downsides to it. It's sorcery speed. It does have improvise, which is cool, but you still have to pay the black mana. You can tab artifacts to bolster the X a little bit if you need to. There is some life gain attached, which may or may not be of consequence, just depends on the situation. But more importantly, it does hopefully take out a creature, and it can, in the late game, take out a sizable creature. The fact that it's a -X ability is also good against an indestructible creature if you come across that. So it's all good for limited. As far as standard goes, there's some better removal out there. We're going to see a card that is absolutely amazing in just a few minutes, and you probably know what I'm talking about already. But this does deal with larger things, so I could see this seeing a little bit of fringe standard play, perhaps maybe a one-of or out of the sideboard to deal with very specific threats. Krill Finality. This is another really fine limited card. It costs 3. A lot of times you feel like this type of effect maybe should only cost 2, but it is an instant. You do get to scry 1. So I feel like that's enough to push it to the 3 spot, and I'm okay with it. Granted, a lot of times instant sorceries and some artifacts are going to be competing for a small amount of slots for you in limited. So does this always make the cut? Maybe not if you just have a lot of really good stuff, but I think this is strong. I think you'll be very happy to play it. There's a lot of good 2 and 1 toughness creatures in this set, as well as in Kaladesh even. So this does take care of a lot of threats, and I love the fact it's an instant. As far as standard goes, I do feel like there could be a Dimir control deck out there, and maybe this is a card that gets run, maybe a 1 or 2 of in a deck like that, to deal with some early threats or some very specific small threats that could show up in the meta. Daring Demolition, another good removal card for a limited. It has the versatility of destroying a creature or vehicle. It is sorcery speed and not instant, and it is 2 on color. But I'll tell you what, it wasn't that long ago that we're paying 6 for a card like this. So I'm happy to pay 4. I'm going to take it and run. Defiance Salvager. This is an interesting card. It does a lot of good stuff. There's a few downsides to it. On the plus side, first off, it's a 2/2 when it comes into play, but you can sacrifice an artifact or creature to give it a +1/+1 counter. You can't do that at any time, but the fact that you can play this and hopefully do it on the turn you play it means that it gets it out of shock range, which is good. Also, it's a sack effect that does turn on your Revolt, which is very, very important. There's some good Revolt cards in black. There's none in blue, but we did see a lot in white the other day. So there's a lot of good Revolt, a lot of strong things out there to play with. And on top of that, if this thing can survive over the course of a long game, if you have a lot of servo tokens or something like that, this can get quite big, even though it doesn't have evasion. I think the biggest downside to this is the fact that you can only activate the sack ability for the artifact or creature anytime you can play sorcery. So that takes away some of the utility of this card, which means you can't sacrifice stuff to it in combat. You can't, if, for example, someone's going to destroy something of yours on their turn, you can't sacrifice it for value at that moment. So that's kind of a downer, but I still think this card is doing enough good things that a lot of the time will make your cut for 3 in limited. Fatal Push. Okay, here we go. This is the card we're talking about. And this is maybe one of the best removal spells printed in years, absolute years at this point. This thing's incredible. It only costs 1. It's an instant. It's an uncommon notice, so there'll be a fair amount of these things running around in limited to be wary of. And I'm glad it is not a rare, because I think this is going to be a highly sought after card for a lot of players in a lot of formats. First off, yes, it's awesome in limited. Play it. You'll be happy. You could argue that it's maybe a little bit less good in limited than some constructed formats, because in limited you tend to see more larger stuff that maybe this can't deal with. But you know what? Still amazing. You'll be happy. It's going to be in standard. Again, this is another reason I feel like the control deck could be a Demure deck as opposed to maybe a more solid blue deck, just because of cards like this that are going to really add a lot of value to control. It deals with a lot of problems in standard, and I don't think the Revolt is too hard to turn on when you need to. Finally, some of the other formats, I mean, you start talking about modern, right? Like, everything in modern is like 2 casting cost, right? Like maybe some 3s and 4s in there too every once in a while, but everything's just so cheap and modern that this is going to take care of most of the things you need to deal with, and that's kind of awesome. Fantastic in every format. Get your copies of this, get your foils if you can. This is going to be a highly sought after card. Fen Hauler. This is okay in limited. I see myself boarding this in probably more than just playing it flat out, and it is a 5/5. It costs 7, which is steep, but it does have improvise, so as long as I have some artifacts to back it up, it becomes a lot more playable. It can't be blocked by artifact creatures, so it's nice when your opponent is on a strong artifact theme, a lot of servo tokens and stuff like that. It gets around them. So that's why I kind of feel like this is more of a sideboard card than a main deck card most of the time. Next we have Foundry Hornet, and this costs 4 for a 2/3 flyer, which in limited is pretty decent to begin with, but if you're in Golgari colors, this gets a lot better and can even help you through a board stall from time to time. If you have a creature you control in the center of the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, and there's a lot of green effects to do that, then all your opponent's creatures get -1/-1 till end of turn. Might be just good enough for you to get one last big attack in and tip the scales of a stalemate, which is pretty cool. I like that ability in a card. 4th Bridge Prowler. This one's not super exciting to me. To me, this is more of a sideboard card if my opponent's playing some good 1 toughness creatures, and there are some good ones in this set, so you don't want to overlook that. But I'm probably not starting off with this in my main deck. Gifted Etherborn. Now, this is a card I'm more than happy to start off in my main deck. A couple things. It's got Death Touch, Lifelink. A lot of people compare this to Vampire Nighthawk, but do remember that had flying. So yes, this is a little bit cheaper, but there is a big difference between flying and not flying. However, having said that, this is a 2 casting cost 2 black, which means don't bank on this being a 2-drop. A lot of times this is going to be a 3 or 4-drop in limited, but it's still very good. Again, it's out of shock range, and the Death Touch and Lifelink make for a very good combination of mechanics. Look at it this way. If you can swing this on turn 2, attack it on turn 3, maybe even still get by on turn 4 due to the fact that it's Death Touch, your opponent might not want to trade up right away. At that point, you've done 4 damage, you gain 4 life, it's an 8-point swing. It's actually pretty good, right? Nice aggressive card for black. As far as standard goes, I don't know if there's going to be a black aggro deck out there anytime soon, just because the Boros decks are so efficient right now. And yes, a black and red or Rakdos aggro deck, there's definitely pieces for that in this set. Maybe in the future, if we get more pieces to that, that could be a thing. And if that eventually does become a thing in the meta, then this card could definitely see standard play in that case. Glint Sleeve Siphoner. This card, I really want it to be good. Like, I love these Pyrexian arena creature cards that come out all the time, and they're never quite as good as I want them to be. But I will say this about this card. It does have some versatility that makes it a little more intriguing. So it only costs 2. It's a 2/1. Yes, it's super fragile, but it does have menace, so it brings a little bit of an aggro element to it too, and it is also a way to bank energy. It gives you energy when it enters the battlefield as well as attacks. Now, that energy, more than likely, you'll want to convert into card draw when you can on your upkeep, but there's other times where banking energy for another big payoff might be an option too, right? So because of all of that, I think this card's a lot better than maybe other cards similar to it that we've seen in the past. In Limited, there's a couple ways this could go. I could be playing an aggressive deck, or maybe I'm just playing any other type of deck and I get this early. It gets in for a little bit of damage. Maybe I draw one card off of it. I feel like I got my money's worth for 2 mana. It feels really good to me, actually. If I get it later in the game, or perhaps it's in a controlled style deck, it might not be quite as good, but it's still giving me some energy and maybe even the potential to, if nothing else, replace itself, right? So if it gets in for 1 attack, or maybe I already have a whole bunch of energy banked and I'm looking for something to do with it, okay, now I'm drawing an extra card on my upkeep and taking a point of damage. That's fine with me, right? So yeah, this is actually pretty versatile, and I do think it's very good in Limited. And yes, it will die to a lot of stuff, but if you can keep it around, you're going to get some value out of it, even if it's for a short period of time. As far as Standard goes, I do think the fragility is going to be a strong weakness for this card, especially with Jacques in the format. That will be a problem. Cards like this will be lightning rods because opponents know that if they stay around, potentially they could get buried in card advantage. They're not going to let that happen, right? But again, if someday there is a more aggressive build with black in it, then this could be a card that sees play there, but I don't think you're going to see this in a traditional control deck necessarily. Gottis Machinations. Okay, this is interesting. I mean, there's some ups and downs to this card. It's cheap. That's a big plus. It only costs 1 black. Whenever you lose life, you do get a energy counter, which is nice as long as you can play this early. If you play this later, this card isn't as good by any means. Now, the second ability, pay 2 energy and sacrifice it. Each opponent loses 3 life. You gain life equal to life lost that way. That's an okay ability. It's not super good because of the life piece, but what I like about it is it does turn on Revolt, and sometimes that is going to matter, especially if you're all in on Revolt. So that's where I see this card shining. If you just need another way to turn on Revolt, this is okay for you. If you're not in a heavy Revolt deck, then I'm probably skipping this one, just because I don't think it does enough, especially if you draw it late. Herald of Anguish. This is a mythic. I like this one a lot, actually. 5/5 flyer with Improvise. Even though it costs 7, it also has some nice control elements to it. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent discards a card, and also if you can sacrifice an artifact to it, pay a black and 1, target creature gets -2/-2. That's kind of nice too. There's just a lot happening here. This reminds me of the demons you used to see back in like Ice Age with all the crazy effects on them and the minus something effects. It just reminds me of that at first glance anyway. Having said that, this card is great and Limited. First off, here's what it's going to do for you. Even if you can't go all in on Improvise, if you can play this as a 4-drop even, you're getting huge value out of this card in Limited as a 5/5 flyer. Also, making your opponents discard, not bad. If you have some artifacts to sacrifice to it, then you can potentially take out some creatures. And also, oh, by the way, that will turn on Revolt as well. So that's kind of nice to have just in your back pocket. And as far as Standard goes, I think this potentially could see a little Standard play, maybe in a Dimir control deck as a finisher. There are some other, probably better finishers out there in some ways that are already printed in other sets in Standard. However, this does some things that they don't, and it does just add to the control element of the deck with the discard option and the possibility to turn on Revolt or destroy another creature while you sacrifice an artifact. So it just gives you options that other cards don't, in other words. So because of that, I think you could see some play there. Definitely one to watch for. Ironclad Revolutionary. This is interesting. I mean, it costs 6 for 4/4, but as long as you can sacrifice a artifact when it enters the battlefield, then it's basically a 6/6. So that feels a lot better. Granted, it doesn't have evasion or anything. As far as the life loss goes, I mean, that's pretty inconsequential. But a 6/6 is still sizable in Limited, and I feel like paying 6 for this, considering it could turn on Revolt, is what really makes this card probably runnable a lot of the times. So again, if I have enough Revolt triggers in my deck, and I feel confident that I'm going to be able to have an artifact sacrifice to it, yeah, I'll probably play this. If I'm not confident in those two things, then it could end up in my sideboard. Midnight Entourage. This one's kind of funny to me. This is a Etherborn Lord. It's actually a really good one. Like, this is a really strong Lord card. It's a little pricey, sure, for some formats. Like, I don't really think you're going to see this converted into a standard deck or anything, considering it's 4/2 on color. But the biggest issue, I think, is there's not a whole ton of options when it comes to Etherborn creatures out there right now. There's some real good ones, don't get me wrong, but I don't know if there's quite enough to put together a deck considering how competitive the meta is right now and how fast it is. But aside from that, I'm glad this card exists, because what this does is it creates a lord for hopefully the future. And I do think we're going to see more Etherborn creatures, maybe even before we go back to Kaladesh, just because I really appreciate the design of this tribe, quite honestly. I'm maybe a little tired of like seeing black do the zombies and all that stuff. I think it's a really cool take on what black is. It doesn't make black feel evil, which I don't think was really the intention of the color, as much as it just kind of shows its consumption. And I think that's really cool. So I hope to see a lot more Etherborn in the future, even on different planes. And I kind of think we will. I think they're popular enough at this point. And there's a lot of ties to the potential of Ashiok being an Etherborn and stuff like that, that I hope this is a theme that reoccurs at some point in the lore. But aside from that, this card is still a lot of fun to mess around with in Commander for sure. Great kitchen table card. And in the future, I think we'll see some good things from this. Night Market Aeronaut. This is just fine for you in limited, as long as you're pretty confident you can hit the Revolt trigger. If you're not confident, then maybe you don't run it. Paying 4 for a 2/2 flyer feels a little steep, but paying 4 for a 3/3 flyer, which now takes it out of shock range, feels a lot better. Perilous Predicament. I like this a lot in limited. At instant speed, you can potentially hit 2 things. Maybe you're only hitting 1, but sometimes that's still good enough, considering, again, it's costing you 5, but it is an instant. You can play it at the end of your turn if you don't end up using your mana or something like that. So, yeah, I think it's good enough. I think it's maybe a tad steep for Standard or something like that, considering we have cards like Fatal Push. But, yeah, you'll be happy to run this in limited. And it does hit all opponents, so it's worthy of noting for Commander. Renegades Getaway. I like having these cards available to me in limited, even if they're out of the sideboard, just because this particular one actually works on target permanent, not just creature, but giving something indestructible at instant speed will allow me to blank a piece of removal at some point, either on a creature or even perhaps an artifact or enchantment or even planeswalker. So that's actually pretty awesome. And on top of that, I get to create a servo token. So icing on the cake. Really makes the casting cost feel a little more appropriate at 3, I guess. So again, even if I'm not main decking this, because there is a lot of competition in limited, you only have so many spots that are non-creature spots, and you have your removal cards you want to work in there. You have good vehicles that you could come across in the Kaladesh packs or in the Aether Revolt packs. So this might not always make it, but definitely remember it's in your sideboard. If you come up against a removal heavy opponent, this can do some serious work. Resourceful Return. I like cards like this. Now, this is sorcery speed. I like them a little better at instant speed, but then who doesn't? But I like the fact that you can return a creature from your graveyard to your hand for just 2 mana, and potentially even have this card replace itself at times, which is pretty awesome, actually. What I like about these effects is it allows you to play a lot looser in the beginning of the game. You can do a lot more trades, knowing that you're going to get more value out of those trades, hopefully, than your opponent will get. And that's why I love running these. I'm happy to run, as long as I have room, at least 1, sometimes even 2 of these type of effects. Secret Salvage. This is kind of a funny card. I mean, in some ways, maybe it's a kitchen table card. This was revealed by Saffron Olive from MTG Goldfish, and he did an amazing article on it. I would suggest checking it out. Basically, all the stuff I have to say about it really is the same stuff he did. But there's a few interesting applications for a card like this. Granted, it's not doing you a whole lot in limited, but if you want to just have fun, crazy kitchen table magic, you can pair this up with Hedron Alignment, right? Like, that could just be a fun afternoon. Maybe not for your opponent, but maybe for you. And there's other applications as well. In Modern, he showed a deck list for perhaps using this with Relentless Rats, which I thought was really intriguing and completely makes sense, of course, with this card, but really takes it to a more spiky level. And then another option, of course, and this is kind of similar, but he showed a commander option with Shadowborn Apostle, which is also pretty intriguing. So this card does a lot of interesting stuff. Again, maybe it's more of a casual card and it's there for the fun factor, but there's a lot of things to do with it, and there's nothing wrong with fun cards like this that might not necessarily cross over into standard, or at least very easily into a constructed format like that. But, you know, that's okay. We want to have these cards in sets at least occasionally. Sly Requisitioner. This is a little pricey for a 2/2 considering the fragility of it. However, it does have Improvise, so that's a good thing. And What this card plays really well with is the cards from Kaladesh in black. Kaladesh had a big theme about black cards that were sacrificing artifacts to get bonuses and stuff like that. If you happen to run into a fair amount of those in your draft, then all of a sudden this card becomes a lot better. Yes, again, you still have to deal with the fact that it's a 2/2, but as long as it can stay alive for a little while, whenever a non-token artifact you control is put into a graveyard, which means probably a lot of times you sacrificed it for whatever reason, then you get a replacement token anyway, if nothing else, which can then be in turn sacrificed to some of these other creatures for some good benefits. So yeah, this card maybe feels a little bit niche. It's not always going to make your main deck in limited, but it does play well with some good cards that are in the format. Vengeful Rebel. This one's kind of funny because when this was initially revealed, it was a Japanese language spoiler from Wizards. I think it was their Facebook page. And typically the community is really good about jumping on translations, but they kind of missed the mark on this one. And it just kind of said Revolt and target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3 until end of turn. It didn't say when this enters the battlefield you can do that. So it sounded like basically every time you can revolt, this thing would hit something for -3/-3, which would be amazing. But of course, that's not what it is. Still a good limited card, though. A little bit fragile at the 2 toughness. Sure, Shock's out there, but you know what? I'm still okay with that. I think the upside's strong enough. I'll pay 3 for this. It's 3/2. I might even get across with a little damage early on. But yes, when I play it, as long as I can revolt, then maybe I'm taking out a decent sized creature for my opponent. I'm pretty good with that. Yahini, Undying Partisan. Okay, here's the legendary creature this time for black, and this is a pretty good one. I like this a lot. Here's what's awesome. 2/2 Haster, super aggressive card. It can relatively quickly protect itself from shocks or anything else that could hit it by either allowing you to sacrifice another creature, giving it indestructible, or else, at least over time anyway, at some point your opponent's going to have a creature die and this will get a +1/+1 counter. You don't want to rely on that first ability. That might take a little longer than you would like sometimes, but that second ability, as long as you have the other creatures to back it up, at least in the short term, you can protect it, which is pretty cool. Having said that, the sacrifice ability is unconditional, which is really awesome. You can use this at any time. It gives it indestructible, but more importantly, it turns on Revolt, and that's a big deal in this set for sure. This card's phenomenal. Great card in limited. If nothing else, even if you're not using Revolt, it's just really annoying to your opponent. It's really going to be hard to get rid of, and it can just keep coming in and coming in. It gets bigger the longer it stays alive, and it can really get out of hand, and it's just hard to deal with in so many levels, right? And not to mention, if you can Revolt on top of it, it's even that much better. Phenomenal card. I do think this will see standard play. I'm trying to figure out where exactly, because it is just, the power level is there. It's definitely good enough. Again, I don't know if we're going to see a black aggro deck or a black red or even black white aggro deck anytime soon in the meta, but if we do at some point, this will definitely be a part of it. Yahini's Expertise. Okay, we talked about this card a little bit yesterday, just because I used it as an example to discuss some of the ways you could chain some of these spells together. And we talked about specifically how you could play the blue Expertise and then chain right into this one, and it's crazy. These cards are all awesome. I mean, free spells, ain't nothing wrong with that, right? So you play this for 4. All creatures get -3/-3. It's kind of a mini board wipe. It's going to hit a lot of things, a lot of very relevant things in this set. And then on top of it, oh yeah, you get to play another spell for free. So maybe you can just put a creature out there so you're ahead of everybody else. That's one of the things when you play a removal spell that can be sometimes annoying, especially a board sweep spell. You play the board sweep and you're kind of out of mana, then all your opponents play a creature, and then you're kind of last to go. This time around, you get to sweep a lot of stuff off the board, and then you are the first to put down a creature without having any extra mana necessarily to do it. That's pretty powerful. And again, these can chain with some of the other spells. Incredible card. Amazing Unlimited. Very happy to play it anytime I see it there. And also, yes, this will see play in Standard. Again, another reason I think we could see a Dimir control deck. Alright, let's move on to a couple of the multicolor cards. This is the lone Rakdos card of the set. It's a good one for limited. I like it. I mean, you pay 3 for a 3/3, that's just fine. Granted, it is 2 different colors. but it does have the nice aggro element at the beginning of your combat on your turn. Target artifact creature gets +2/+0 till end of turn. So if you're attacking in with a flyer that's an artifact creature, maybe a good vehicle or something, this just gives you a little more punch to it. And finally, our last card of the day is the lone Golgari card of the set, Winding Constrictor. And I like this card too. Nice stats, 2/3, stays out of shock range. It is 2 different colors, so don't feel like this is always going to be a 2-drop for you. Maybe it's more of a 3-drop in limited. But it does have an interesting ability too, that if something is going to get a counter, whether that be an artifact or a creature or you, then it's going to get an additional one of that type. So fantastic. I mean, it's in the right colors, right? It pairs very well with Golgari. Green is really trying to throw counters on stuff all over the place. So it plays really well with that concept. And also too, it just has a lot of versatility when it comes to affecting tokens that are hitting a player. So that's nice for energy, for example. Another thing that green is very strong in, finding energy, then you get a little bit of a bonus there too. And when you start thinking about commander and stuff like that, you do want to keep in mind this will hit things like experience counters, which is kind of nice, as well as maybe even infect counters. So you want to keep that in mind. And it's pretty cool. I mean, it just does a lot of interesting things. It's got good stats to back it up, so I like it. Great and limited if you're in green and black. It's an awesome card. It kind of ties those colors together very nicely. And I think this could see some standard play at some point down the road. Just another one to keep an eye on. I think the raw power level's there. Having said that, those are all the cards in black for today, and we're going to be back tomorrow. We'll be looking at all the red cards, the following day the green, and then the last day we'll wrap things up with the colorless cards. And the day after that we'll also do our pre-release primer, especially if you've never been to a pre-release before. Hopefully that will help you out a little bit so you know what to expect. Having said that, as always, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.